If you've clicked on this video because you want to learn how to study smarter, study less, and get straight A's effortlessly, you're in the right place. Learning how to study smarter will guaranteed change your life. And that's why in this video, I'll share with you 3 levels of no BS studying advice that will help you study more effectively and get the grades you want, no matter what you're studying. Let's get straight into it with the fundamentals, which are the things that are necessary for all of these other study techniques to work. To do this, let's see if you can spot the massive problem here that stops so many students from studying effectively. All right, I really need to get cracking on studying for this test. Let's get my work up. Hey, I should check that. Damn, I need to fill out these adoption papers for my cat's dog. Did this pen always look like that? Is that a camera? You see, studies have found that if your attention is split on multiple things, your ability to remember content can drop by 37%. If your studying environment is always full of distractions, you'll always struggle to give your full attention to what you're doing. Well, the best students always start by getting some peace. You see, the best way to stop distractions isn't to try and resist them, but to remove them from your environment completely. Even better, you can try moving to a completely new environment like a cafe or a library to signal to your brain that it's time to work. But there's more, because removing distractions isn't just limited to your physical environment. If you use a computer to study, change your notification settings so that only the most urgent messages come through, delete any distracting apps, and consider getting a website blocker like Cold Turkey to block off those most distracting websites. Being ruthless with cutting distractions out of your life will mean that rather than doing a high number of low quality hours of study, you can do a smaller number of high quality hours. But even after cutting out distractions, so many students have another problem that stops them spending time on the things that get them better grades. In fact, this problem isn't unique to students, but it's one that some of the most important people in the world have. The person that I'm talking about is the President of the United States, and the issue they had was so bad that they needed to come up with a solution for it. This problem was that the president had so many different things to do with different deadlines. Sometimes there would be tasks that could be completed in weeks or months, whereas there were other tasks that needed to be completed in just hours or days. This meant that the tasks that needed to be done soon were getting done, but the important work that could wait wasn't getting worked on. This president's name was Dwight D. Eisenhower, and the solution he invented is the Eisenhower Matrix, which is one of the best productivity tools that I use every single day. Let me show you how you can use it specifically as a student to start using your time much smarter. The matrix has 2 axes, one for importance and another for urgency, which splits tasks into one of 4 quadrants. I take importance to mean how much a task contributes to goals or values, whereas urgency really just refers to its due date. As a student, something that's important and urgent would be preparing for a test tomorrow, whereas preparing for a test in a month's time would be something that's important but not that urgent. Something that's not that important but urgent would be doing a homework task that's due tomorrow, but it doesn't contribute to your grade. And then something that's not important and also not urgent would be something like catching up on a TV show. The power of this matrix is that you can start thinking about which tasks you should prioritize and do first, but there's a little trick to this that can make all the difference to its effectiveness. You might think that the tasks in quadrant 1, which are important and urgent, are the ones that you should do first, but this actually isn't true. Let me show you why. Imagine you come home from school and you have some homework that's due tomorrow, and it contributes to your grade, so it's somewhat important, but you also have a test next week, which is worth way more. If you decide to do the homework, which is the important and urgent task before dinner, it's true that you probably would get it done, but then after dinner, you'll probably be tired, and then what's most likely is that you'll procrastinate, and because you have a whole week left to study for the test, you'll just put it off and say you'll do it another time. On the other hand, if you study for the test before dinner, even if you're tired and you don't really feel like working after dinner, it doesn't really matter because the homework is due tomorrow and you don't have much choice about when you can get it done. By prioritizing your important but not urgent tasks first, you can use your motivation on the tasks that actually matter. And this is what I've personally done to consistently work on tasks in the long term and get so far ahead of my classmates. So now let's move on to the intermediate tips, which are the things that will let you remember all of the content you need confidently weeks before your exams. But before we get onto that, we need to understand the problem with our memory. The human brain is a lot like a leaky bucket, and I'm sure you're familiar with that feeling of learning something in class just to feel like you've forgotten it that evening. Our brains are incredibly good at forgetting things, and this is often described in something called the forgetting curve, which shows that our memory of certain concepts decreases rapidly over time. So how do we fix this problem and stop our memories from decreasing so fast? The solution that I'm talking about is called retrieval practice, and it involves taking information out of your brain from memory. This is often referred to as active recall, and some common methods of doing it are practice testing and flashcards. Testing yourself on a concept refreshes your memory of it and also strengthens your understanding, which means that it should take longer for you to forget it next time. If you don't have some form of retrieval practice or active recall in your studying, you should 100% start doing so, for example with practice tests. That being said though, a lot of students over-rely on flashcards and practice testing, which hurts their studying efficiency. And here's why. Practice testing and flashcards both work by getting you to remember something with some sort of stem or a cue. As a result, these are both forms of cued recall, and that means that if you only use these to revise, you'll be very susceptible to changes in cue that can occur on your exams. For example, if you did a practice question that told you that Napoleon was born in Corsica, and then a question on the exam asked you if Napoleon was born in France, you might actually get this question wrong if you didn't understand that Corsica is in France. This means that it's important that you don't just know certain questions or facts, but you actually understand how these concepts fit into the bigger picture. So how do you fix this problem and create that type of knowledge? Well, the solution involves removing cues from your recall. Instead of using practice tests or flashcards to cue your memory, try revising things by writing your own practice questions without any help, or teaching an imaginary friend everything you know about the topic from scratch. This has another benefit, which is that using multiple strategies to revise is referred to as interleaving, and it helps your understanding and memory of concepts more than if you just use a single strategy. These tips will mean that your revision is extremely time efficient and effective, but how are you supposed to know when you should be doing your retrieval sessions? Well, the solution here will mean that you never fall behind on any of your subjects. And to understand this, let's have a look at the forgetting curve and the problem that most students face. Active recall works to refresh your memory so that it's at the top of the forgetting curve again. But the problem that a lot of students face is that once they learn something in class, the next time they might revise it might be days or at best a week or two before their exam. On the forgetting curve, this means that simply too much time has passed since they learnt the content, and if you try doing active recall, so much content is forgotten that it's just not as useful. So what's the solution? Well, the concept of taking time between when you learn something and when you revise it next is referred to as spacing, and utilizing it to its full potential will make your studying so much more effective. So how do you do this? Well, the trick is to set up an easy revision tracking spreadsheet. Every time you have a class, write down the date of the class and the topic that you learned onto the first column in this spreadsheet. Science has found that the best time to do retrieval is when you remember something but you're just about to forget it. So for most people, and putting this into a reasonable schedule, this means that you want to revise something on the day you learnt it, 2 to 3 days after, a week after, and then a month after. But there's more, because keeping this revision schedule will keep you organized, but will also help you see the progress that you're making. It is such a good feeling to see evidence of the things that you have revised, and to know that you could confidently answer questions on any of those topics. But this spreadsheet will also help you realize when you're falling behind on your revision. Remembering what I said about the Eisenhower Matrix, active recall is always going to be one of those important but not urgent tasks, which means that you should almost always prioritize it first to make sure that it gets done. This will mean that you can put in tiny amounts of effort throughout the semester to be absolutely chilling when exams come around. Congratulations, you've made it onto the advanced tips. What I've told you already will 100% transform your studying, but these last few tips will help you infinitely scale the speed at which you can learn. But before we get onto that, we need to understand the problem with the education system that these tips directly address. I want to make an important distinction here, that there's a difference between when you learn something for the first time, for example in class or in a lecture, and revision. I'm sure that all of you have experienced that feeling of being in class and being taught something or reading some information that you know you need to know, but just knowing that you won't be able to remember it in 30 minutes, let alone later that day. One of the biggest problems with our education system is that we're never taught how to do this learning in class or in lectures. This creates a massive problem because you can't really actively recall something something you never learned, and if you don't know how to learn effectively when you're being taught in class, this can make your whole studying system less efficient. The good thing is that there are certain things that you can do in class to dramatically increase your memory of the things that are taught. So what are they? Well, you can think of trying to learn in class like following a difficult and poorly written recipe. The recipe might have many different components that you need to cook at the same time, but it might not be written clearly in that way. The thing is, if you were actually doing this recipe, you'd probably read over the whole thing first, just so you knew which parts you needed to do together. If you didn't do this, you might make a lot of mistakes, and you might not realize that the sauce needs to be prepared while you're boiling the carrots, and you might end up boiling the carrots too much while you're trying to prepare the sauce. When we're learning things, we might need to understand how one concept is related to another, but we might not be presented with these ideas in the right order. For example, you might be taught in anatomy that the premotor cortex is right next to the primary motor cortex in the brain, but that might not really make much sense to you until you understand their functions, which is that the premotor cortex essentially plans movements and the primary motor cortex executes them. After learning that, you might think, aha, it makes sense that they're together anatomically, but this information might be presented 20 or 30 minutes later in a lecture, and you might be confused until then. This is just an example, but it should highlight to you that information that is probably best understood together isn't necessarily always presented that way. So how can we fix this problem? Well, just like you would read through the whole recipe at the start, you can prepare for your classes in the same way. If you know that the class will cover certain sections of the textbook, you can briefly read over everything to get a basic idea of how everything fits together. In practice, this means going through the material from a class and collecting some keywords that represent the main concept. Following that, you can go through each of the keywords and ask questions like, what might I need to know for this keyword to be relevant? Or how might this relate to the other things that I'm learning? This will mean that once you're in class, you'll have a basic understanding of how everything fits together, and then you'll find that remembering and understanding everything in class is so much easier. But even once you do this, there's more that you can do to truly become an expert at what you're studying so that you can easily ace any exams. So what is it? As someone who scored in the top 0.2% of my country and who's now in medical school, I've been surrounded by people who are extremely academically gifted. Something that I notice about the people who seem to stand out is that they learn extremely deeply. When they're learning, they always try to learn as much as they can, and sometimes they seem to know things that are far outside the content of the syllabus just because they want to know about it. This means that when these students are presented with difficult questions, they're able to answer them easily because they simply know so much. This is something that we can actually learn from and use to take our studying to the next level. But how? Well, when you're learning, try to explore why certain concepts are important and try to link different ideas together. Stay in tune with your natural sense of curiosity, and if you're curious about a certain part of the topic, explore that even if it's slightly outside of the scope of what you're supposed to learn. This type of learning is never taught in the education system, but a lot of the best students do this naturally. When you start doing this, you'll realize that often the things you were curious about relate back to parts of the topic that you can be assessed on, and having this knowledge helps you understand the information so much better. This leads us on to a bonus tip as a thank you for making it this far, which is that learning is a lot like a snowball. When you start to build the good habits of focusing consistently, prioritizing, revising, and learning more deeply, you'll find that these skills stack up and make all of the learning you do so much easier. The more you learn, the more you'll be able to start thinking like an expert and start seeing the parallels and connections in many different parts of a topic. You'll be able to start hypothesizing what will and will not work, and you'll be able to start learning so much faster. Learning can be difficult at times, but the more effort you put in, the bigger the snowball will get and the faster it will start to roll. Every minute of studying you do does actually make a difference. But knowing that, you probably want to know how you can most effectively learn information. So how do you do that? Well, it starts by clicking this video because you'll be able to combine these tips with some even more powerful strategies that I used to learn in medical school, which will make everything you've learnt 5 times more effective.